I don't know if we honed in on the one precise word which our text in Vayikra Rabbah, yes, vis-a-vis Nar Hayiti v'gam zakanti, lo iti tzadik ne'ezav, from Tehillim Mizmor Lamed Zayin, chapter 37 of Psalms. I don't know that, in our close reading of that in the last video recording, don't worry, this is probably my last video recording with which I'll bother you. There'll be one more, but that won't be, substantive. That will be about, I'll make that, I plan to make that later, to record that later today. That would be about our coming 3 weeks. And the last piece of thinking writing for our course of study that I think would be an important opportunity for each of us to yes, thinking, writing is a form of thinking. It pushes our thinking, and thus our experience. Experience isn't enough by itself. When we get older, we have more experience. We don't necessarily become wiser. Only those who reflect upon their experience and reflect upon it in a rather rigorous, demanding way. Of course, then we have to define rigorous and demanding. And I've tried to actually do that, to point the way, to indicate the way, anyway, in that 25-page, whatever it was, yes, at the beginning of the course, or kind of a little pamphlet on what kind of thinking am I looking for, is this professing professor looking for from you, for you to try out, for each of us to try out together with me, hypothetically, again, as a hypothesis. You don't have to agree with that approach to in-depth thinking, engaging intellectually, but you want to try it on for size. Again, you're paying good money, or somebody is, for this. So you don't want to leave exactly the same as the way you've come in. You want to consider a point of view, a perspective that is somewhat different from your own. And again, that doesn't mean you agree or you're going to adopt it. As I said, I would hope you wouldn't adopt it. I think that would be bad news. But I would think that there will be something from it which you can adapt, or certainly and/or I call it gaining angles of appreciation, plausibility, in relation to a perspective that you may not have been as aware of, if at all, before our course in quite the same way. And this involves certain harchavat hadat, expansion of the mind. Before I saw this, or my horizon was this, now it's this, or you can see or it's not necessarily, in a sense, expanded in size. It may be the same, but expanded in the sense of, before I knew this, and now I know it over at this side of, the content here. Before I knew this, and now I know, this. It's the same amount, but it's a different part of the horizon that maybe a person hasn't quite considered in the same way before. So again, I want to in this recording, I want to share with you a close reading of Yoma 69b about Anshe Knesset Agdolah. You have the text. Yeah, we have the text in this week's a text for close reading. And I hope to take a look. I hope that you're reading at least some, if not all, of the essay reading, the chapter reading, perhaps my essay on the ethical imagination, the chances for it, after what has happened, as Paul Celan referred to what we tend to call the Holocaust. The ethical imagination after what has happened. So perhaps you'll look at that essay and some of the other 2 or 3 essays for this week. But for coming back to the close reading of focused 1-2-page texts from our sacred literature, what is the word? In our Leviticus Rabbah, 20 words, a midrash that comprises 20 words in reference to Nar Hayiti V'gam Zakanti Lower Itzi Sadi Me'azav. That it turns on one word, and actually the Anshe Knesset Agdolah text that we're about to study together is also the same exact method. It's honing in on one word, and that word experience, the reality, the truth, a truth that word can speak to, a reality that it can speak to, an experience that it can speak to, that we can recognize, and that our students can recognize. Again, maybe not agree in every sense of the word, but can recognize, can appreciate as being real, as being plausibly anyway, a accurate and honest, responsible, in-depth experience, and then again reflection, take on that experience, including in a religious context, including in a religious perspective. It too, that text in Yoma that we're about to study together, turns around one word, Gibor. A couple of other words too, Norah, Ha'el Hagadol, Gibor VaNorah. But particularly on Gibor. Gibor? Mahi Gvura. What is Gvura? Here, in our Leviticus Rabbah text, the Vayikra Rabbah text, the question is the word Ne'ezav in Psalm 37. I never saw a righteous person Ne'ezav. The Midrash here, in its 20 words, reinterprets, reassigns the reality that we should understand Ne'ezav in Psalm 37 as being in reference to. Psalm 37 is the Torah Shebichtav. It's part of the Tanakh, the written Torah. What is the oral Torah? How are we to understand it according to the rabbinic tradition? Because when we stand up at the bima, in a Torah reading on Shabbat or on Monday and Thursday, and we hold the Torah scroll, and we say the blessing, this is the Torah of truth. We don't mean the way it's written in there. We mean the way we understand it via the tradition, the rabbinic tradition, and its heirs, its continuators of the rabbinic tradition, dor v'dor shav, each generation, and its demandings, dor shav, and its midrashim, and its demandings more of the text than is there at first appearance, and maybe even it runs against the conventional reading of the text, and maybe even it's more than the conventional. So again, it's not just commentary or explanation. When Moshe ends up in the Beit Midrash Shel Rabbi Akiva, he can't follow the teaching, because Rabbi Akiva is not just explaining or commenting on the Torah that Moshe was the intermediary to bring to Israel, to the people. Rabbi Akiva's not just commenting. If he was just commenting or explaining, Moshe could follow it more or less. But he was entering into bold dialogue. He was drawing things from each little letter and decorating each letter and the decorations of each letter. But again, drawing not just from what's there, but in conversation with. And there are other indications, such as that story about Moshe in the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Akiva, other indications of the way Chazal understood, experienced their own project. For example, there's the Mishnah that, yes, the laws of Kashrut and Shabbat and giving testimony in court and giving vows, making vows, are all mountains and mountains, heaps and heaps and mountains of laws and the details of laws hanging, all these mountains and heaps of laws, details of laws hanging from one biblical thread or hair, if you want to translate. It's incredible. This reflects the consciousness of the rabbis, at least many of them, that about their project, that they understood. They're entering into bold dialogue with. They're not just commenting, explaining. For sure, they often are being the carriers and then the articulators of what the British call common law, ways the people before them understood Kashrut or Shabbat, or the law of the daughters, if you know what I'm referring to, or Tefillin. The Bible doesn't spell it out, the Torah Shebichtav. There certainly were such traditions that were passed on, but they weren't passed on just as stories, narratives. Drama is not passed on, and its truths, exactly the same way from storyteller to storyteller. It undergoes change. And not particularly change by accident, but that can happen too, with scribes copying over time. But changes that happen, innovations, because the storytellers and then the writers, and then whether it's Halacha or Agadah, the legislators, are artists in their craft. And each is adding their own, a little bit, voice. And that is the continuation of revelation. Revelation is not one time, as I've said over and over again, or redemption or creation or whatever. So this one word is ne'ezav. Yes? The conventional reading is, I never saw a righteous person, because a righteous person will not, and even his descendants or her descendants will not be in serious trouble, such as seeking bread, lacking bread. Yes? But our Midrash is aware that there's a contradiction, like Kiddushin, page 39b. The contradiction is in many ma'asim shayu, ma'asiot shayu, stories, things that happened, narratives, stuff that happens in our experience that contradicts. Because we have seen tzaddikim and innocents and wonderful people forsaken. In the sense, again, if we take the conventional reading, it's, well, I never saw a righteous person forsaken or his descendants, meaning God will protect them. God will protect him. He's righteous, so he's rewarded. There's recompense. There's the good consequence. But we know that is too often not the case, sometimes in the millions. And descendants, his children, sometimes the children, really, literally the children. And yet, the rabbis don't throw that psalm out, don't throw that verse out. They say you've got to understand it in a different way. Yes, it's true, but you have to understand it in a different way. Af al pi shebanav mivakshim lachem. and the implication, is clear. Afalpi also, despite the fact that there is the righteous person himself, the father, might very well be in serious trouble, and his descendants. Otot Sadiq Avihem Lo Yene'ezav Mi Yirato Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I never saw him forsaken in a different sense now. In a different sense. It's a different meaning now. I never saw him forsaken of feeling, of knowing the presence of the divine. So whatever happens, as I translated in my psalm, whatever happens is part of the human condition. It might be disease that hits me. It might be an earthquake. It might be free will, relative free will of human beings. Some of them determine that they're going to exact cruelty, act towards me with cruelty, maybe even ultimate cruelty, and beyond what the mind can grasp as cruelty, even beyond the ultimate, even beyond the graspable. But when that happens, the tzaddik will still and always know himself to be accompanied by a higher truth, a larger truth, the divine, in its empathy, in her empathy with the righteous, with the innocent. That person won't be alone. Lo irara ki ata imadi. No one else might be with me. The whole world might be against me. Terrible people might be against me. And they might succeed to do me in. As long as I'm alive, I'm not alone. I won't fear whatever harm might come as part of life. I won't fear. That's what happens in the Yoma, Daf Samech Tet Amud Bet. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Lama Nikra Shman Anshe Knesset Agadolah. See, we don't really know a lot historically. We don't really know a lot. And also in our sacred narratives and dramas, we don't know a lot about this group, the Anshe Knesset Agadolah. Don't know a lot about them. And yet there's this name they have. Anshe Knesset Agadolah. So something about them is gadol. Something about them is great. What is it? Well, Shechziru, right? Why are they called men of the great assembly? I think the community, gathering together, coming together, the great coming together of certain people. Who are these people? Well, the question, I think, is focusing on the word Gedolah. What's so great about them? The answer, or response. In the Talmud, there's no real answer. There's only a series of responses, possible responses. Shechziru atara liyoshna. Oh. They returned the crown, a crown, to its former position. In other words, its former state of dignity, that was proper to it. That was, yes, something happened to the crown that some some undermining, some diminishing of its beauty, of its the high state, the height of sensitivity and ethics and spirituality, beauty that the crown represents. Something over time was diminished, was lost, but they returned it to its proper glory, to its proper yes, value. Okay. What was diminished? How it was diminished? How did they return it to its? Oh, we have a story. It's going to now be narrated. Ata Moshe, Ba Moshe. Moshe came along. Amar, Ha'el Hagadol Gibor. Excuse me. V'Hanora. In his turning to the reality we call the divine God, in addressing that reality, he addressed it as Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor V'Hanora. I'm going to, maybe I can help my throat a little if I take a little water. So I'm in the kitchen now. And see if I can take a little bit of water. Excuse me for this. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyeh bidvaro. Well, of course, everything is according to His will, according to its will, according to the divine will. It's part of the divine will. We can see that in our experience. And we have other reasons also from our experience. The divine is unlike us. It's not like it can be in Christianity or in Hinduism. You can't have a Krishna or a Jesus. The divine can't be of the human. The divine is utterly different, absolutely different. Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad. The divine is singular. Monotheism in Hebrew, the expression is Yichudo Shel Hashem. Yes? Yichudo Shel Hashem. Yes? Yichudo Shel Hashem. Or if you want, Yichud Hashem. The ultimate otherness, difference of the divine. Take a look at Emmanuel Levinas, whether it's whichever of the books that we're looking at, The Fence and the Neighbor, or Between Athens and Jerusalem. This is key for Emmanuel Levinas's religious experience and that of so many others. So Hakol Niyeh Bidvaro, everything is according to its word, its deed. But part of its word, part of its deed, part of its will is that we live in a physical world. We live physical bodies. There's a relative free will. And the divine own becoming is such that it's not a human-like becoming in any way. Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, the divine is singular, totally unique, divine, yes. Other. Yes. So, Moshe, in referring to the divine, in addressing the divine, calls the divine, speaks to the divine, addresses it as Ha'el Hagadol Gibor V'Hanora. Ata Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah comes along, everything's fine. But we already know the Talmudic mind, yes, the Talmudic project. It's not going to stay. Moshe doesn't have the last word. Nobody has the last word, even Moshe in the Talmud. There's going to be differences of opinion. Every position is going to be examined, critiqued, turning it this way and that way to make sure how might it be true, and then different approaches with from different quarters, from different rabbis, different thinkers, experiencers. Ata Yirmiyahu v'amar nochrim mekarkarin behechalo zarim nochrim minukar to feel alienated, estranged. The strangers, foreigners have come into his temple. First of all, how is that allowed? And even into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the sacred of sacreds, which nobody can enter. Once a year, the Kohen Gadol enters it to pronounce the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name. It's almost unpronounceable, which becomes a metaphor for the divine is almost unpronounceable, unnameable in Judaism, biblical and rabbinic Judaism, because, again, it's totally unique. It's other than us, different than us. Want to get close to the divine? Want to be religious? Got to try to think the unthought. Imagine, open ourselves to what we don't know, to the not I, to what we haven't yet known. Stretch the mind. Come up with the chidush in interpreting Torah. That's, I think, why Torah study is paramount. Because in the intellectual realm, we push ourselves to think a new thought. Chidush. And the commandment most often repeated in the Torah is don't oppress the stranger among you, the minority, those who are different, because you know what it's like in Egypt. I think this is also a way to open ourselves to the otherness of the divine that we can only very partially open ourselves to. So do it in the direct ways you can, and that would then be indirect towards the divine. But through it you would catch a glimpse of the ultimate otherness, difference of the divine, if you can think a new thought, a different thought than you thought before. And in the realm of the social, cultural realm of interhuman, to open yourself to people who are other, fellow Jews, to people who are different, that have a different view, but also the non-Jew, the stranger, the minority, because you know what that feels like. So Yirmiyahu comes along and he says, strangers, foreigners have come into your temple. Ayei norotav, how can they come into your temple? They're makarkarin, they're exclaiming, they're screaming, exclaiming victory cheers, victory yells over Israel. Ayei norotav, where are his awfulness? How does he terrify anybody? Where's his awesomeness? It's not there. Lo amar nora. So Jeremiah, in addressing the divine, said Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor. He didn't say Hanora. And you can check it in the verses. Yeah. Do I have it written down here? No. Look up in the concordance. We can check. You'll see that there's Jeremiah actually refers to the divine, addresses the divine as Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor. So here the rabbis are giving a interpretation of why. Why does he drop? Why does he not say Norotav? Because it's not true. Because it contradicts his experience, they say. So he's not going to say it. The end of our text has this amazing phrase: Ein kozvim lakadosh baruch hu. You can't lie. You can't lie to God. His nickname is truth. The face of God, says Helene Sixou, is to look into the god-awful truth. The truth is always awful to us, because the truth is always something other than what we yet know, and then we can come to know it, and then we're going to move on, like Abraham and Sarah, be Ivrim, river crossers, find another river to cross. transition into something else. Excuse me. The miracle of water. It's just water. Who needs Cecil B. DeMille, Hollywood movie, splitting of sea in some literal kind of sense. Of course there's a miracle, the splitting of the sea. The miracle is that when we're in situations, sometimes as individuals, sometimes as groups, when the Egyptian army is at our back and the sea is in front, it seems. In other words, there's not going to be any change. We have no hope, in other words. But if you don't depend on a miracle from God, but go into the water up to your nostrils, having faith there doesn't mean that God will open up the waters. Having faith there, Rosenzweig and Buber says, faith means openness to risk. They take the risk. They know religiously that God has put into the fabric of creation the possibility of newness. That's what creation is, the possibility of surprise. But the human being has to draw out that potential by acting in some way. And that involves risk. Ata Daniel, the prophet Daniel comes along. Amar Nochrim Mishtabdim Bibinyan or Bibanav Haye Vurotav. The foreigners have overpowered Mishtabdim. They have oppressed, put into slavery, literally. The Nikud here is not right. Should be my translation, your children. Because the Gemara doesn't have Nikud. Subjugates your children, or his children, but Banav, God's children, Israel. All humanity is also God's children. The prophet Amos says, just as I took you out of the land of Egypt, the children of Israel, the children of Kaftor, I took out of the land of Assyria, the children of Cush, the Ethiopians, I took them out of the land of Kish. So that's an amazing verse in Amos, because that's language that is reserved. We thought is reserved for Israel, to call us the children of Israel, and then that He took us out of the land of Egypt. Here He says, "No, I took out." Every people I have have caught glimpses of me through their history, through their experience. Even the Assyrians, your enemies, even the Ethiopians. So you have your unique experience and take on me, but others have theirs. So if the foreigners, coming back to Daniel, says the foreigners have subjugated his children, how can, where is his ayeg v'rotav? Where is his heroism, his strength? Lo amar gibor. And the same thing. We can look up in Daniel, there's actual verse there where he refers to the God, to the divine, he addresses him, and he leaves out, he says, a gadola, a gadola. He doesn't say, a gibor. Couldn't bring himself to say it, because you have to say it with integrity. This is what we're doing in our course from day one. How to say with integrity the words in our prayer book, the words in our Torah, the words in our Mishnah, in our Gemara, etc., etc. That's what Jewish education is about. Should be about. But most often, it's not. We skip like the stone you throw, which is great fun, across the water. Usually it's a Jewish education. It's so fun for our students. It's boring, but sometimes we can make it fun. We can throw these stones, skip across the top of the water. But top of the water is no good. It just goes in a little bit into the water and skips to the next point. Got to go deep into the water. How to be able to say the words of the prayers and live the words of the prayers and say the words of Torah and live the words of Torah in the broader sense of Torah, or dor b'dor shav, with integrity, so that ein kozvim lakadosh baruch hu, lo meshakrim lakadosh baruch hu. So Daniel doesn't say gibor. Ata inhu, the amaru adraba. They bow haim, the haim amru. Who's they now? What happens? They come along, and they said, but they said, who's they? Well, the only plural here is Anshe Knesset Agdolah. We've already forgotten about them. This is often what happens, yes, in rabbinic interpretation, and it's good. It should, because we were carried someplace else, and then we have what Jerome Bruner calls effective surprise. We're surprised because we've come back now. It's like in a musical piece also. Music, you have first movement, second movement. There's a theme in the first movement. It repeats, etc. Then you go into later on in the first movement, then the second movement. Where's the theme? It's gone. We've forgotten about it. End of the second movement or the beginning of the third. It builds in us. We're reminded to say, that's lovely to hear that, because I heard that somewhere. I heard that in the beginning of the piece, of the work. All the work. And it takes a bit of work to come to appreciate it. A bit of close reading and wrestling. Jacob wrestling. We wrestle. We don't just go with what we know already. That's also good. Mark and all of us, I say to you and to myself. It's also good to bring ourselves in what we know. That's half of what it's about. But the other half is to open ourselves to what might be distinctive and different. See, turn it this way, that way. Again, not to agree, we don't know yet. And certainly, again, we shouldn't agree totally, adopt it totally, it won't work. Each person must find his or her own way. I've been trying to model my stubbornness in that. If I've achieved any depth in that, for you to say, this guy really, he's really probing here and coming to something specific. When it comes to meaning, when it comes to how these words of our religious tradition can resonate, speak to real experiences, our own and that of our students. But then you have to say, but now I have to do that. What am I going to read to prepare myself? I want you to ask, to teach Jonah or chapter 1 of Joshua or whatever. What am I going to read to prepare myself? What essays, etc.? What ideas can I come up with about what Jonah, what it's all about? Is the miracle of the fish, the big fish, swallows him literally? I don't know how well that's going to go down with our students. And if it does go well down with them, I don't know if that's good either. Because that's not what the rabbis are about. That's not what the Bible is about. That would be more impressive as anything. But it really wouldn't matter. That isn't what it's about. What matters is the miracle that Jonah is reborn. Fish, fertility, womb. That Jonah is in there, the synagogue. It's like a synagogue. Remember one of the Midrash, Yoma says, one of the opinions, one of the passages. He's inside the whale, the big fish. Because it's a form of, what happens with Yonah, it's a form of escape from responsibility, but it's also a form of retreat. Positive retreat is also a chance, an opportunity to reflect and to be reborn, to come back, to return a bit different from the reflection. He still doesn't really get it, though. He still really doesn't get it. He still really doesn't get why he should help the people of Nineveh with the warning of their imminent destruction. I mean, they're non-Israelites. They're even often enemies of Israel. They're God's children too, just like the Kikayon, the gourd. God cares about all his creatures, etc. You go back and look. But again, I'm not saying this is the only reading of Jonah. I'm not saying use those specific clues. I'm saying, yeah, think of this course is talking about formal, informal. Adopt different forms of communication. You can use packet of clues. You can use passages from films. You can use all kinds of approaches, art, music. So that's partly what I've been trying to suggest to you by modeling it, by doing it. But even that won't be enough if we're not intellectually and ethically, experientially going to go in depth into asking these questions. What can this really mean? Could it really be this? How does it stand up to our experience? Of course, we can misexperience. We can misread experience. So we have to, it's complicated sometimes. Sometimes it's not so complicated. It's not complicated that millions of people, perform good, but they fall down from the tree and they die. And as far as Holocaust goes, so-called Holocaust, read my paper when you'll understand better why I say so-called. As far as what Paul Celan called, as I said, that's what happened over there. There was a rickety ladder, according to Zionists, let's say. The rickety ladder, according to Zionists, was we had to realize that the evidence was clear that the Jews in Europe will really not be able to continue to live. That the development of Christian Europe towards us, towards our people and our tradition, our way of life, was such that they didn't want us to live as Jews. Ultimately, they didn't want us, and then they didn't want us to live among them. And then ultimately, this is the way Raul Hilberg expresses this in his classic work on the Holocaust called The Destruction of European Jewry. He says, at first we were told, you can't live as Jews. Then we were told, you can't live among us if you're going to be Jews. And then we were told, you can't live. We should have seen this development. We should have put it together. And then determined a way to defend ourselves, which ultimately meant to leave Europe. So there was a rickety ladder we had to look at. God gave us a mind. God gave us messengers, prophets, social critics, to put it all together, give us analyses. So, Atu Inhu, then the people of the Anshe Knesset Agdolah, they came along. And they said, Adraba, no, it's exactly the opposite. On the contrary, all the more so. Zohi Gevurato. This is the unbelievably strong strength of him, of the divine. The ultimate strength is Shekovesh et Yitzro. Read Hans Jonas's piece, essay about the divine and God after Auschwitz. I think his essential argument is that, the really powerful doesn't have to wield its power. It's a kind of strange contradiction. The ones who have to wield their power actually are not so powerful. They're actually nervous. They're actually nervous about their power. They're actually showing their self-doubts about their strength when they have to wield it. Obviously, sometimes you have to, especially as human beings, take up power and strength, even violence. It's not an ethical thing to, let somebody kill you. But when you start thinking that, everything is a mortal threat to your very existence. Everything is a threat to your life. Everything is endangering your life, or the life of others. You're responsible. And when it isn't, when rationally there's no threat there. I mean, to raise questions can be a threat, but it's called democracy if it's not accompanied by violence. Well, Amedin Yavin, those of you who have been following the news here in Israel, you know to what I'm referring. One instance of many. So this is the strength of the divine, that the divine koveshet yitzro. Another girsa, another version, Rabbi Soloveitchik points this out, of Pirkei Avot even, of the Mishnah Avot. Right, Mihu HaGibor, koveshet yitzro. You know, Yetzer here doesn't mean evil inclination. Even evil inclination doesn't mean evil inclination. That's the conventional in translation of Yitzro. But really, if you look at the rabbinic texts, the Yetzer isn't necessarily evil. I think a better translation would be passion, because the rabbis say without the Yetzer, we wouldn't have civilization. We wouldn't make music and build buildings and discover travel by airplanes, etc. All of which is good, potentially. Anything could be used for bad. But it's good, Rabbi Soloveitchik says in The Lonely Man of Faith, because for Adam 1, part of our personality, because it increases our control over our lives. And that has everything to do with our dignity. You can't live with dignity if you have no control over your life. For all kinds of factors. Natural factors, earthquakes or whatever, diseases, you have no control over. God gave us a mind, God gave us the potential and a body that has tremendous abilities to heal itself, needs some help. So the Anshe Knesset Agdolah come along with a reinterpretation. Same thing as Forsaken. Tzaddik Ne'ezav is reinterpreted. They come along and say, wait a minute, but that is the strength of the divine. The very fact that the divine doesn't intervene is strength. That's a sign of strength. That's a kind of strength. It's a different kind. Maimonides, in his letter on astrology, says, the reason Bar Kokhba's revolt against Rome failed, and then ultimately the last stronghold that fell, was Beitar. What was it, 132, 133, 135, I guess 135. The battle went on a bit before. But the reason it failed, that revolt, the Rambam says, is because there was bad military and foreign policy. Look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah says the same thing. He says it's bad military and foreign policy and social ethics. Injustice towards the stranger, the minority, towards the widow, and towards the orphan. What do they all have in common? They don't have advocates. They don't have power. And so they're taken advantage of. They get the raw end of the deal. That's not justice. That's injustice. When you have that, it weakens your society. A house divided against itself, there's Abraham Lincoln again. A house, he knew his Bible, including his Hebrew Bible. A house divided against itself will not stand. I earlier quoted him that we should not be praying or thinking God is with us. We should be praying and hoping that we be with God. Not that God's will be to serve us, to help us, but that our will be to serve God, to help God. God doesn't have to shepherd us, though in some ways he, she, it does shepherd us. But really it does so to teach us. And even when it doesn't shepherd us, because it can't, by its own laws of its involvement in our lives, in our world, as individuals and as collectives. It's challenging us that we have to be the shepherds, the carers of the world, of ourselves. If I'm not for myself, it will be for me. Ukshani rak latzmi ma'ani, mi'ani. But if I'm only for myself, then it's tribal. It's not morality, towards my own people. If it's only my own people, my own people, my own people. We saw that already in Europe, what that led to. So we don't want to do the same thing here, or anything even the smallest bit like it. So we come, I'm skipping a line or two, and V'Rabbanan, Heichi Avdi. Yes? You see it? Yeah. V'Rabbanan, Heichi Avdi. What is Rabbanan? Our teachers, our masters, namely Jeremiah and Daniel. How could they avdi? How could they oseh? How could they do what they hachi kach? How could they do what they did? Namely, drop, not say hagibur, not say hanorah. How can they just not say those words? They're part of the tradition that they have to say. Moshe, has established that practice. Va'akri takanta detakin Moshe. They uprooted a practice which was established, which was set up by Moshe. I mean, that's wild. How could they not say those words? Amar Rabbi Elazar. One of the rabbis comes to defend Jeremiah and Daniel, which is extraordinary because that's not the approach of Chazal. Again, Chazal don't say, this contradicts reality, so we're not going to say it, this or that verse or word or in our sacred tradition, our literature. They don't say that. They say, let's reinterpret it. So Jeremiah, in a way that we can say it and live it with integrity. But here he comes and he defends them, Rabbi Elazar. Mitoch sheyodim. Why did they uproot those words? Why did they refuse to say those words? It contradicted their experience. Okay, yes. We're going to the greatness of unshakeness of Allah is they return the crown to its glory, namely the full. We can say for all the words, we can address God with integrity, such that the words speak to something true in our experience, teach something true. We can say Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanorah. But you got to then understand Gibor and Norah in a certain way. Yes, they're true, but in a certain way. Of course, in our generation, there are people that don't want to say Ha'el, because they say it contradicts experience. There's no Ha'el, or there's no Hagadol. But then we have philosophers, Rabbi Soloveitchik, Mordechai Kaplan, Emmanuel Levinas, Yeshua Leibovich, etc., who come along and they say, Avram, Yoshua, Heschel, and they come and they say, but there is a way, because you can't say Ha'el, because you're thinking of it as meaning the following, as involving the following, as being, as involving the following kinds of truths and realities and experience. That doesn't make sense to you because of other significant dimensions of your and our experience. But that's not the only way to understand and experience the reality that word Ha'el speaks to. This is the work of Jewish philosophy, interpretation, Midrash. Mitoch, the reason they didn't say those words, says Rabbi Elazar, is Mitoch Shiodin, because they knew, out of the fact that they knew, Ba'akadosh, Baruch Hu, that the sacred, may it be acknowledged and blessed way beyond, our conventional surface, skipping across the surface, understandings, glimpses, experiences, misreadings, misunderstood, or just very beyond or. They know, Shakadosh Baruch Hu, Sha'amitri, who is true, who is truth, who is all about truth, the god-awful truth. Lifichach lo kizvubo, therefore they couldn't lie to him. So you got to find a way not to say the words in a way that is lying, that is false, with a way that is true. Your way that's true, different than my way is true. Though there may be some commonality. That's okay. I mean, I'm not saying just, this is Steve's, weird idea of Book of Jonah or chapter 1 of Joshua or Purim, Megillat Esther, God, Hashgacha, prophecy. I'm bringing texts, quite a lot of texts. I'm reading them closely. Not the only way to read them, but it's certainly a very plausible way to read them, and that many of our teachers from many quarters, different quarters, have understood them in more or less this way. Now, there are other sources too, and those sources understand the divine in much more of a personal and human-like way, no question. So you have to find your texts and your readings of the texts and examine your experiences of those and of life in the world as it is, and see who your students are. So again, whoever they are, whether it's going to speak to them, not speak to them, but even if it speaks to them, the it might not be worth the speaking. Again, Bertolt Brecht says 5 difficulties in telling the truth, writing the truth, teaching the truth. What truth is worth telling? What really matters to you? What do you really care about? Why do you care about God? Why do you care about Judaism? There's all kinds of stuff in Judaism and Talmud. There's misogynist stuff, there's racist stuff, there's all kinds of stuff, there's beautiful stuff. And you can add a verse, says in the Dead Poets Society. What does it mean, the Dead Poets Society? That the poets aren't dead. That Rashi didn't die. That the Rambam didn't die. That Daniel and Jeremiah and Sheikh Nasser Adollah, they're all here. When I used to live years ago here, and I lived in East Talpiot, and I taught full-time at the university, and it's across the other side of the city. So I came back home by bus. I wasn't in a hurry, but I'd go by cab very often. And we made became a kind of a joke, because when they first, I used to call the cab. The guy who coordinates the driver said, "How many passengers?" And I said, "Well, there's me, but I always go together with Avraham Avinu and Sari Imenu and the Rambam and Rabbi Soloveitchik and the Ari." But I said, I don't know. They all somehow fit in the one cab with me, so I assume you'll accept payment for as though it were one passenger. As though it were one passenger. So our poets aren't dead. Tzadikim Talmidei Chachamim B'mitatam Nikra'im Chayim, it says in Masachet Brachot. The sages, the righteous, in their deaths are called alive. They're referred to as being living. And then we have this kind of macabre expression also. Siftei Tzadikim Talmidei Chachamim Dobavot B'kever. The lips of the wise are moving from the grave. They continue to speak to us. And again, still Yom HaShoah here in Israel, here in Jerusalem. So even if they don't have a proper grave, they're not dead. Of course, in a very real sense, they are dead. V'lo hametim yahaleluya. They can't continue to observe the life of Torah and mitzvot. They can't continue to interpret and innovate, bring their whole selves, participate actively, boldly in the work of revelation, redemption, creation. But what they were able to do in their lives, it continues to speak to us, even if they didn't have anywhere near a proper grave. This is the Dead Poets Society. The poets continue speaking, they're not dead. But the nature of poetry, of great poetry, is that the reader, room is made for the reader. Indeed, the reader is abandoned a bit, and more than a bit, is left to his or her own devices with the text, with multiple texts, with their texture, with the textile of texts, the weave, the masechet, the associations, boing, 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 from here, there, all directions, and the student is left, the reader is left to quite figure out things quite by himself, herself, with the chavruta, with others, but the teacher withdraws to a large degree, migalema'at and mechasema'at, revealing a little, then concealing it quickly. Kol Torotai Mivaroten, says Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, all my teachings are but introductions, because for them to truly be teachings, for them to be of significance, genuine significance for others, for the student must add himself, herself. So we have to make room for the student by limiting ourselves. Beginning of the course, I limited myself. I tried to, very much so. I wasn't in the discussion course in the beginning 2 weeks. I wasn't even here. Hardly. I had set up a lot of the texts and everything. But as I said, that turned out to be very consonant with my approach, with my philosophy and practice, of teaching, of learning. You were left to figure out quite a lot on your own. And I continue to only be there a bit for you beyond the offerings, the many offerings that I shared. But as time went on, especially after midway and after 3/4 of way, in your midterm, 3/4 term of reflections, I've tried to come in and explain more where we've been, as I see it, what it's been all about, and then especially in the last, as I say, few days. So there'll be another recording, one more, as I say, though not so much substantive, I mean, text reading, but where we're going in the next 3 weeks, our remaining 3 weeks, and the last piece of thinking, writing, opportunity, how I see that. You should really begin working on that. So in the coming hours, before the end of the day, I plan to, I hope to be able to make a recording of that, about that. But it's all about that, how you can contribute a verse, and readings of verses, but in a sense, readings that are distinctive and creative, such that they kind of constitute their own, they become a text in and of themselves, so that you can indeed contribute a verse, another verse, and another, letters, in love with letters, What will your verse be? Is there something I have shared that can stir you, that can evoke, that can challenge, that can suggest? Something that you might be able to try out, adapt, and find, as I say, an invitation, an evocation, a provocation, a challenge that what has your verse been about, and how can it might it be a bit even more creative and bold and distinctive and in depth and responsible, etc., etc. How might it be a bit different, possibly, than it would have been some months ago without this course? That's what you want to try out. That's what you want to try out. The last piece of thinking writing. What will your verse be? I encourage that it be a piece of curriculum that you'll try to begin working on. And just the first stages, you won't complete it. Some first curriculum ideas, how you would teach something. And so that could be the way that you would apply this. But the way you'll begin is just by looking back at the course first, not first thinking of what piece of curriculum you might teach, what piece of our tradition of the Jewish curriculum that you might teach and to whom. But first, thinking about the course really. What is it? Is there something here that might be emerging for you as distinctive, as different, as a perspective on Judaism, on Jewish life, on Jewish learning, on teaching, on the experiential, on an experiential Jewish classroom, an experiential Judaism that might be a little bit different than what it was for you without our course before. So I basically said it already, but it'll be a short video recording that I'll speak to this coming 3 weeks a little bit more. And now the second 2 weeks, the latter 2 weeks, we will be devoted. There won't be any new text that we'll look at or anything like that. We will devote the whole last 2 weeks to working by ourselves and together, sharing our first thoughts of work on this last piece of thinking, writing, in relation to the offerings, what this course has offered for all of its limitations and perhaps qualities, achievements as well.